everyone. This is the World Benchmarking Alliance Digital Inclusion Benchmark KIC, Collective Impact Coalition Roundtable. We're really delighted to have you today. I'm Lauren Compare. I'm head of stewardship and engagement at Boston Common Asset Management. I co-lead the investor work alongside Fidelity International, and really delighted today to really focus on more than a year's worth of work by the KIC, including civil society and stakeholders and investors, engaging very comprehensively companies trying to adopt ethical AI practices. I want to just open with a few opening remarks to set the stage. We know that when AI algorithms and AI technology is used without proper governance ethics and embedded human rights, it causes real harm. And this has been demonstrated time and time again. Technology, as we well know, has expanded beyond, and the use of AI and algorithms has expanded beyond what is technically called the technology center to other groups and sectors, including healthcare, finance, telecommunications, the implementation of and delivery of social services by governments. We also have seen further evidence of biased data sets that AI algorithms are based on can perpetuate discriminatory practices. We've also seen the negative impact that technology has on user health and well-being without controls and oversight, including parental controls. This really makes it imperative that we have a comprehensive approach to ethical AI, hence the engagement and collaboration by investors, and also the idea of multi-stakeholder initiatives and leverage. Just a year ago, we came together around a single metric as investors. Adopt a public ethical AI policy. Sounds simple enough, right? It's not. We've seen progress, and really I'm happy to highlight, and Jan will go into this further, that 52 companies do now have some version of a public ethical AI policy in scope for the WBA inclusion benchmark. But more is needed, and we think it's really important, and one of the main focus areas for the KIC over the next 12 months will be not only to sort of focus on public adoption of ethical AI practices, but how is it embedded, how is it overseen, and a true integration around human rights. In terms of the agenda, we're going to start with a keynote from Tara Denham, the Director General for Human Rights, Freedom and Inclusion for Global Affairs Canada. That'll be followed by Jan from the WBA team sharing as the lead digital sector transformation person, key findings and recommendations. And then we're going to dive into a panel discussion from long-standing members of the KIC. Patrick Short, he's a Sustainability Investment Associate at Fidelity International and has actually had experience engaging technology companies through shareholder resolutions, for example, or at least voting them. You can clarify that, Patrick. We have Caitlin Kraft Buckman, CEO, founder of Women at the Table. She's been a long-standing and original part of the KIC. I'm not gonna say this properly. I'll try. I'm going to ask you to Tam Belike Matobi, Senior Manager Partners and Engagement at Paradigm Initiative, and then Benjamin, who's a Stewardship Analyst at Cadrium and in France. And there'll be time for Q&A, and we'll end on closing remarks by each of the participants. I'm going to hand it over right now to Tara for some opening comments, and welcome everyone.
Thanks, Lauren. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. I was just reflecting on what it means and what we've been through over the last year, where we were a year ago and where we are now, and why it's so important to participate in this launch of the Digital Collective Impact Coalition Progress Report. And so when I was sitting there last night thinking about, what this last year has looked like, I think, what we've seen is there's been just such a massive movement over the last year about in the world of artificial intelligence, not particularly in the world of artificial intelligence, but potentially the awareness with which everybody is focused on artificial intelligence. And so for me, this is why I really wanted to participate today, because I'm wondering, is this the moment of opportunity that perhaps all of the work that people have been doing for years, that there's an opportunity to see where these can merge up the different worlds and the obligations that we have in moving our collective efforts on artificial intelligence forward. So what I was thinking about myself, my own journey. So I'm the DG of Human Rights, Freedoms, and Inclusion, and often people wonder why I speak at these events, but I actually think it makes complete sense that within that portfolio, I'm also responsible for digital policy and cybersecurity policy, and actually am able to leverage those worlds and bring them together and what they mean to advocate for human rights in a digital world, and using the cyber environment around us. And in that role, I've been very familiar of the conversations going back years about the positive and negative impacts on individuals and societies that AI offers us. There's been a lot of effort. I remember going on panels years ago trying to balance those conversations about the opportunity and needs to harness AI in order to meet the SDGs, but wanting to really give that voice to some of the cautions that Lauren also mentioned, and that all of you on this line have been those voices in the various panels and in the various conversations to try and balance those discussions. So what I see is, of course, over the last year, we've seen those conversations, what I would describe as they've been accelerated into overdrive. That's how it feels to me. We've continued to see the innovation related to AI, including here in Canada. Of course, we have some of the leading academics and expertise that are contributing to these innovations. But what we've also seen is the wide-scale integration of the latest generative AI systems into products and services like chatbots and search engines. And these systems, as you know, are capable of using natural language prompts to generate code and produce human-like synthetic media, including voice, audio, text, photorealistic images and videos. And we see how generative AI systems like ChatGPT and other applications from Amazon, Google, DeepMind, and how they're employing these sophisticated deep learning techniques to find patterns while also acquiring facts, absorbing grammar, and learning rudimentary logic. As we've seen this sort of take front and center, and more of the general population pay attention, and policymakers, we've probably all been part of conversations with our colleagues, our family, our friends, our neighbors, our communities, who once they've interacted and become, particularly ChatGPT, they've been surprised, they've been excited, they've been scared, they've been intimidated, and they're all trying to think about, the many ways that they could use this new tool in their personal lives. And our roles, and we have different roles in this ecosystem, is to think beyond our personal lives, but at the lives of society and what that's going to mean. But you can feel that combination of excitement and nervousness and trying to push it forward. So while you've all known for years about the significant economic, social, environmental, and political impacts from the positive and negative, this game-changing applicability of generative AI into decision-making, businesses, and communities, which are all borderless, there's a borderless reality, has put the discussions about what each of us are going to be doing and the various actors into what I referred to earlier as overdrive. So governments and private sectors alike are vying for these to create the favorable conditions for the significant economic drivers that generative AI and AI proposes. And this is particularly in the backdrop of the impacts of a global pandemic, where many countries, of course, are still reeling from the economic and financial strains. And of course, after 19 months of a war in Europe with global ramifications. So you see these forces of economic drivers, business opportunities at the same time of the concerns and excitement of AI. And that's where I'm wondering what the opportunities are and how we can work better together. So as the world is fixated on these benefits of accessible and powerful generative AI systems, is this the moment? Is this the moment where we can actually push forward some of those meaningful conversations about how to govern AI? I put that challenge to all of us. So we've seen I mean, you're all familiar with a lot of the actions that I'm describing in terms of what's happened over the last year and why I feel this increased attention. So we did see in July, of course, we've seen the US announce the voluntary commitments on AI, the EU developing the Artificial Intelligence Act, the US and the EU Trade and Technology Council releasing a statement reaffirming their commitment to a risk-based approach to advance trustworthy and responsible AI. For Canada, we've been actively engaged in a number of international forums on the governance of AI, including various international negotiations, including at the G7. We've also been working with the EU and other partners at the Council of Europe for a potential treaty on AI and human rights, democracy, and rule of law. And for those that aren't tracking, although I'm sure you are, the Council of Europe Treaty could be the first international binding global instrument to regulate AI. And the purpose of the treaty is to address the potential harms and risks from the use of AI in both the public and private sector. As you know, the actions that I've just noted, of which these are only a small fraction of the conversations and the initiatives that are underway, are a combination of seeking out regulatory and voluntary commitments. And we know that those conversations are going to continue, and there will be a combination of the approaches as we continue to debate what exactly governments should do. So this is where the work and the information of the digital CIC progress report that's being launched is so important, because I do see it as a key part of the ecosystem that we're all working in to try and strengthen the accountability mechanisms. Having the data, having the findings, having the conversations, of course, looking at the questions that are going to be posed in terms of where are the successes, where are the obstacles. And so I hope that the conversations today will also enrich the conversations that myself and all of us are having to sort of push those conversations at the national and international level of regulatory and legislative frameworks. So I think we can all see a very intense year ahead of us where the debate is going to continue about what regulation will look like and voluntary approaches. I appreciate the conversations that you're going to have today, because I think these paths, regulatory, voluntary, are going to continue simultaneously. And I think we need to find the most appropriate opportunities for the cross-fertilization and to strengthen the respective perspectives and the roles that we all have in those conversations that are taking place. I don't think it's a conversation about should it be regulatory or should it be voluntary. It's going to be a combination of all as we move forward at a very rapid pace. So while I'm unable to participate in your full event, and I apologize for that because I did see the conversations you're going to have, I really do look forward to hearing the readout, given, as I just described, participating in a lot of these international conversations. The work that's happening provides excellent data that we can all use, and a robust understanding of the opportunities that present each of us. And so I take it as a personal opportunity and a challenge to learn and continue to evolve my perspective. And I hope today offers that to each of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tara. Maybe before you leave, what could we do as a collective group to help you in your day-to-day work? Is it raising awareness? Is it sharing perspectives with through consultation with the Canadian government? What could we do? What could we think about helping enable your day-to-day job?
So I'm always obsessed with data. Hence why I'm so intrigued by these conversations. But I'm really intrigued. We need more of the data and information about what's happening, what's out there, what do we see, because we're having conversations about voluntary, and we need to know what voluntary looks like when it's being implemented. And those conversations and that information is then what, for for myself and for others, we can then take into the conversations about, and which parts are the legislative toolkits most appropriate, because those legislative toolkits will be applied nationally and internationally. So it's continuing to get the information. I'm always appreciative of the offer. Of course, there's the education and the awareness raising, and I think that's something that perhaps we can do for each other, right? Collectively, what are the opportunities that I can also raise awareness about this work? And then how can I also use your information more effectively? I'll give you an example, very concrete example. I think there's a lot of us in government. This is not going to be a surprise to anybody, that the level of understanding is not as strong in government, particular foreign service, which I can speak to, on some of these issues. But these issues are impacting every part of our policy landscape. So for me, yes, of course, my team and we're participating in these international conversations and negotiations. But the secondary part of what I'd like to see is a lot more understanding of our diplomatic network, of our heads of mission, of our foreign service officers, of our policy analysts in other issues, not just the people that are negotiating on AI, but the people that are crafting policies on education, healthcare. And so I think that's where, maybe we could seek out opportunities to do more education internal to some of the government structures, some of the government structures, because it's sort of, we have to be doing it at the same time, right?
No, that's great. Thank you so much, Tara. And we'll definitely follow up on. It feels like an invitation to more formally discuss some of these issues. Thanks very much. I know you have to head off, and we'll be back in touch. So thank you again.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Jan, why don't we bring up your slide and share some of the overview you prepared for the progress report before we move to the panel?
Thanks so much, Lauren. And I know that Tara has, I believe, just left, but I do still want to extend a special appreciation to Tara and to Global Affairs Canada. They have been or Canada in general, has been a stalwart champion of work on this topic, and also an unwavering supporter of our specific efforts. So we're very grateful for that. I will also say that accelerated into overdrive, which I noted down as a phrase that Tara used, has strong potential to inspire the title of our next progress report. So I would say we're already having starting to form the sort of the seeds of a plan. So I also, on an overarching note, I have to say I'm deeply inspired by this initiative. Collective action like this is uniquely energizing for me and so many others in this space, especially when we know that it's part of a broader constellation of campaigns that are scrutinizing AI from various angles. I think we can expect to see more of that, and the more coordination we can achieve among those campaigns, the better. So as Lauren mentioned, I'm the digital transformation lead at WBA, and this report is the fruit of a year's worth of efforts by investors, by civil society groups, by the team behind WBA's digital inclusion benchmark, all of whom aimed to push companies to accelerate their progress on ethical AI. And that starts by persuading companies to publish their AI principles. That's what we see as a gateway. Of course, that's not the end all, but there's very clear value to focusing on one specific ask for a broad set of companies and building on that from there. And I think both Lauren and Tara have described in very eloquent terms why this is necessary. I think every day brings us new evidence of why it's necessary. Last year, just after the launch of the coalition, OpenAI lit the proverbial fuse of generative AI through the launch of ChatGPT. And that has spread faster than most of its sort of predecessor technologies. At the same time, we are seeing multiple, as Tara mentioned, multiple approaches to regulation, from voluntary commitments and closed door meetings, as the one we just had yesterday in the US, to transparency-focused laws in the EU, to strict regulation that at the same time reaffirms state power in countries like China. So it's a very tumultuous and diverse field of regulation that's also extraordinarily developing extraordinarily fast, I would say. So this is a bit of a hybrid report. It looks back on a year of individual engagements by investors with companies that did not have AI principles as of the 2021 digital inclusion benchmark, but it also provides at the same time new preliminary data from our research team at WBA, comparing or benchmarking companies on a broader set of ethical AI disclosures. So what did we find? In a nutshell, few companies publish AI principles, but we're seeing that progress is accelerating on this front, largely through collective pushes such as this one. So since the launch of the digital kick, as we call it, 19 of the 200 companies that we evaluated in the 2023 digital inclusion benchmark have announced their AI principles, and kick members have engaged with all 19 of those companies. So I think that really speaks to the power of collective action. Of course, there are always other factors that that push companies to take this step, but I think here correlation really almost approximates causation, and certainly contributes to the broadening of this set of developments as a standard. So as of this month, we have 52 companies, according to our data, that have made their principles public. That is up from 33, I believe, in the 2021 edition of the benchmark. So that's quite a lot of progress in a year's time, approximately. Secondly, most companies are receptive to outreach on ethical AI, but not all of them. Investors have led outreach over the past year to 44 companies in total, of which 28 were willing to come to the table to talk about their oversight structures, as well as their plans to release AI principles. That said, there were 11 companies that were either unresponsive or declined to join a dialogue, even privately. And some of those companies are at the forefront of developing and deploying AI. So this is a clear, although we consider these engagements to be highly successful, there are still those holdouts among the companies that really need to be both targeted and reached, so as to actually create a space for a conversation that's bilateral and not simply in one direction. Thirdly, governance and oversight mechanisms remain poorly explained. This was a recurring theme throughout the engagements. The companies outlined numerous board-level committees, subcommittees, and that's valuable information, but they were much more opaque when it comes to which teams below the executive level have a hand in driving ethical AI. So that's another gap that really needs to be sort of further explored, because it's still not exactly clear how the development of policies and practices channels up to the board, and how the concerns of management level teams are sort of escalated to the highest level. And then finally, and there are more key findings that we have in the report, but these are 4 that we wanted to highlight today. Finally, implementation and impact assessment are 2 persistent blind spots that we identified in the research, as well as in the engagements. So out of the 52 companies that have ethical AI principles as of September, we found that only 6 showed evidence of human rights impact assessments that included a specific focus on AI. And then a further 8 companies, including some of the ones that had evidence of human rights impact assessments, demonstrated how they operationalized their principles. And in the sort of grand scheme of things, only 3 companies fulfilled all of the expectations that we set out in our preliminary ethical AI indicator, which we're testing out with this report. So a lot of progress to be made. We have a plan to build out the next phase of the kick based on these findings, and you can find a snapshot of those plans at the end of the report. Suffice to say that we are very excited to ramp up our activities as the campaign evolves. And with that, I am happy to hand it back over to Lauren to get us started on the conversation with our panelists. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jan. And actually, many of the aspects that Jan highlighted have already started to be incorporated into many of the dialogues, for example, that I've had and others within the investor group have had. It wasn't just that one KPI. Patrick, I'm going to ask both questions at once and give you the chance to respond. Why have you committed to co-leading this initiative, focused on ethical AI? Why has Fidelity specifically thought that this was an important area to focus stewardship activities on? And then how should we be evolving or shaping the KIC in the next iteration? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so hi everyone. Thanks Lauren and thanks Jan and Tara. So I guess just for some background, I work in Fidelity's sustainable investing team, and as Lauren mentioned previously, I've had some experience in this field through, I guess, evaluating shareholder proposals, particularly at big tech companies in the US. So yeah, really excited to drive this initiative forward. I guess on the first question about why Fidelity has committed to leading the KIC on ethical AI, I guess news to nobody, AI is a term that's become ubiquitous in today's news and media as the technology continues to play an increasingly prevalent role in all our lives. At Fidelity, we acknowledge investors have a critical role to play in the ethical AI space as both, I guess, a user of the technology, an operator in the broader financial services ecosystem, and yeah, more importantly, as a steward of client assets. The opportunities and solutions AI is providing our portfolio companies are both impressive and numerous across loads of different sectors, and I'd say probably notably healthcare. But we feel really strongly that we have a responsibility to manage both, I guess, the well understood risks of, I guess, bias and discrimination, but also to ensure the guardrails are firmly in place to guard against, I guess, the broader, more existential risks. So I guess to bring it all together, these challenges won't be solved in isolation by investors. We need cross-sector collaboration from civil society to regulators, and I guess that's what makes this KIC such a powerful tool to advance the ethical AI agenda, and something that we as Fidelity are very excited to be co-leading on. So collective action and knowledge sharing serves as the most effective combination to continue the success of this initiative. I guess looking ahead, where we see the KIC moving forwards, and I guess what we can all do in that space, I think we're at a stage now where we really need to kick on and evolve our asks as a group. The tech's developed at such a rapid pace that I don't think it's enough anymore just to address the gaps in corporate disclosure and I guess in that the disclosure of public ethical AI principles. So I guess in practice, this means, I guess, two or three things. So at the laggards, continuing to stress the materiality angle. So I guess both in terms of financial materiality, the risks of poor data management, incoming regulatory risk, but I guess more importantly, continuing to stress the double materiality angle there. So the stress for ethical AI principles, and I guess a shift in mindset towards the economy-wide impacts of AI and the broader risks there. I guess just as important is continuing the discussions we've had with the companies we'd consider leaders in the space, looking at how they're putting into practice the principles they've already got in place, and taking the learnings from their implementation programs to, I guess, allow us to build on the understanding of best practice, which in turn will allow us to go back to the laggards, stress the benefit on both sides of the implementation of these minimum standards. And then I guess the final point is something that I've thought a lot about in recent weeks. I think better articulating our expectations across the various different use cases. So I think all in the ethical AI, I guess, sphere of influence have a responsibility to manage these risks. But I guess there's a fundamental difference between a vendor, a buyer, a third party. And essentially, we need to have robust expectations on all of those members of the supply chain. So I think appreciating the nuances, upskilling from our perspective will allow us to further develop the conversations we're having. And frankly, so when we're around the table this time next year, we can look back on a year well spent. Yeah, just a few points from me, and yeah, really happy to be here with you all.
Thanks so much, Patrick. Just wanted to highlight that yes, there is that need to sort of raise up the bar with the laggards, but also ensure that actually what is being implemented with the leaders is fit for purpose, right? And really applying that across the value chain. No, that's extremely important, and obviously having that embedded sort of high governance and ethics and human rights, right? Looking at risks and impacts. Caitlin, unfortunately, we are a little bit behind on time. So I think for the rest of the panelists, if you could try to keep your prepared responses to 3 minutes, and then hopefully we might gain some time in the Q&A to come, and you'll have a chance to come back for final comments. Caitlin, given that you are not an investor, what do you think are the current gaps in multi-stakeholder approaches, and how can how can we work with civil society, to address the challenges? How can we work together? What would be most effective, especially going into the next 12 months?
Yeah, thank you so much, Lauren. So what we do here at Women at the Table is we focus on systems change, and we use the prism of tech and innovation to leverage points in the economy, vis-a-vis investor relations, democratic governance, and tech. So for us, this is like a very, very important initiative because we need a whole of society approach going forward with AI. And the private sector is the largest player, but it's also the player with the largest agency in the entire ecosystem that needs to be a whole of society ecosystem. So this, for me, is a very critical conversation and a critical alliance. But that said, AI and technology itself is too important to be left to technologists. It's too important to be left to this private sector or to policymakers. And we need also, as I'd said, if we look at the entire ecosystem, what we want to do is we want to involve grassroots civil society as well as international organizations, civil society. So the communities that are affected really need to have seats at the table in the design, in the development, and the implementation. I think this is going to help with reputational risk. I think it's going to make more robust products. I think it's going to bring us to more stable and useful communities and societies going forward, but that's going to take a little bit of a change in design from what we're doing presently. So if we're going to have this conversation, we also, I think, we do a lot with digital public governance. We need to really use this moment to look at the societies that we want to live in. We can use this moment to redesign services, to redesign products, and to really look at, instead of just digitizing what we've got, so it's like faster pizza delivery, which is great. I mean, I think that we all appreciate that, but really, what is the utility of a lot of the things that we're pushing out there, and what can we do with the technology to actually affect people, many more people with hundreds of millions of data points, as opposed to the kind of more binary way that we were designing things before. So we want to advocate for more seats at the table, more critical conversations, and just to have the people who are affected by the technology in there in the design processes, which I think is going to benefit everybody.
Wonderful. And I'm actually going to take up we're going to invite you to help inform our asks of companies. So that's my call to action to you going into the next 12 months, to have this more sort of, full society approach. And I do think, having informed asks by grassroots and civil society and impacted communities and users is extremely important in the next 12 months. To get it right. So thanks so much, Caitlin. I'm going to move over to Makeli Matambe from Paradigm. And here are your two questions. how can companies ensure their ethical their AI systems are fair, transparent, and accountable? And how can this kick really enable that and also support some of the work that you're doing?
Thank you so much. As you've already mentioned, I work for Paradigm Initiative as Senior Manager, Partnerships and Engagements. And just to, respond to your question, well, how can, companies remain or ensure that there's fairness and transparency? I think for me, what is key is due diligence. And when you're looking at AI systems, you find that by very nature, they're quite opaque and complex, and demystifying that complexity through communication. Communication is always a tool that ensures that human interaction happens well. But in the context of technology, you find that communication is key as well, in the sense of including everybody who needs to put their voice or put their thoughts on the table as well. So in the context of corporates remaining or ensuring that they are transparent, I think it's very critical subject or topic that they really need to value due diligence in their processes to make sure that everything is inclusive in terms of processes of designing of AI technologies. I would also highlight that proactive disclosure is very key, and one thing that the digital kick has brought on board is that multi-stakeholder approach that ensures that there is some form of assessment in terms of what is happening in terms of design and deployment of technology. And I think it's something that is something that makes the kick tick, and making sure that no one is left behind, and those voices that need to be on the table are included to be able to also flag out their key concerns. We cannot assume that groups that are not on the table will be well represented by another stakeholder group, and that multi-stakeholder approach is very critical to ensure that corporates remain fair and transparent as well when we're looking at artificial intelligence and emerging technologies generally. So I think that's what I'll just highlight, and also just emphasize that inbuilt ethics, it's something that cannot be avoided when we're looking at the use of technology, particularly when we're concerned about human rights protections. It's very critical that ethics are built into the design of any technology, and the key ingredient basically is to have a human rights lens when anything is being developed. And I think the KIC definitely with the multi-stakeholder approach has definitely been doing a lot of interventions that are driving towards corporate accountability as well. And I think one of the things that we're doing today is launching something that assesses progress, and that's something very fundamental as well that needs to continue to happen, because as well corporates need to consistently as well review their technologies to ensure that human rights are protected at the end of the day. So I think those will be just my brief reflections, and I'll hand it over back to you.
Thank you so much. And this idea of sort of embedding across the value chain of technology development, I think, is really important. This idea of like embedding human rights, human intervention, and human oversight. And I think those were some of some of the
Lauren, I believe you've muted yourself by accident.
So my invitation to you is who is at the table and who's not, and let's look at maybe bringing some other critical voices into the conversation over the next 12 months. So thank you so much. Appreciate your insights and your perspective. Why don't we go to Ben from Cadrium, another investor who has really been focusing over the last couple of years on some of the highest risk use of AI and algorithms, and that's facial recognition technology. And so what are your thoughts in terms of like what we should be focusing on as investors? What are sort of the key elements and key expectations we can support through the investor dialogue? And Ben, who would you suggest we engage as a kick going into the next 12 months?
Okay, yeah. So look, absolutely brilliant for us to be a part of this powerful engagement. As Jan said, the power of collective action is great. I think it's the knowledge sharing has been great. To answer your question on the on who's missing, I mean, I really think that the people missing here are on the financial side. I think the ESG research firms are missing. The proxy voting advisors, the equity and credit rating agencies, the investment banks are all missing from this, you know, this great collective action. You know, I don't think I've ever seen the word responsible AI coming, you know, on an MSCI ESG report of a corporate. There's some companies that we all exclude from our portfolios that are, you know, AAA rated in some of these firms. So I think that as much as we take this topic of responsible AI and just more generally tech and human rights very seriously, I don't think the rest of the community is. I think we should ask investment banks to do much better due diligence on who they're bringing to market. You know, equity and bonds. Same maybe for stock exchanges. You know, maybe listing on a stock exchange should be one of the requirements. Should be to have an ethics committee. So things like that. I think there's plenty of decent things, decent people to bring to the table, and not just our little group of, you know, responsible investors and experts and NGOs. I think we've been quite good at doing that, but we need to broaden that. And just another point I wanted to make is that as an investor, we really appreciate working with you know, all the research that comes with the WBA Digital Inclusion Benchmark to have an index. We also do we also have this from other engagements like Carbon Action 100, the RDR, Access to Nutrition Index. All these give us, you know, milestones for companies, you know, give us expectations, challenges for these companies. And it's great to be able to go to these companies with, you know, not just being an investor with a funky question, but having the, you know, all the backing of this this research behind us. And for us, impact is important. Our regulators, especially in Europe, are asking us for measurable impact on our investments. So it's important for us to be able to measure that. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks so much, merci beaucoup. We're going to go, I think, into Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, please either put them in the chat or unmute yourself. And please raise your hand so that we can actually see you. I'm going to ask Jan and Nicholas to help also field questions. Okay, so far none. If we don't see any questions, I would ask if any of the panelists, let's see, do we have some questions here? Okay. So Louisa has asked a question. How do we move forward towards accountable AI, and should that be the goal? This idea of sort of focusing on both regulation and voluntary. Maybe I can ask any of the panelists, like, is it the right metric? Is the KPI of an ethical public AI set of policies or principles the end goal, or is it really sort of the opening, the opening to something much more comprehensive? So what should be our core KPI going into the next 12 months, and what would you support as elements of that? Patrick and Ben, and then Caitlin and others, please feel away in. Patrick, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll kick us off. I mentioned it briefly in the opening remarks. I do think it's a good starting point, right? I think it's a good minimum expectation to have, but we're at a point now where we do need to move forward. But essentially, these companies aren't all starting from the same starting point. yes, we're initially focusing on tech companies, but across the broader market, this is technology that's going to spread pretty quickly. So I think the first starting point should be that policy. But as companies advance, as they improve disclosure, this isn't just about a disclosure metric, is how I'm looking at things. But yeah, maybe Ben could jump in.
Yeah, Ben, do you want to weigh
Sorry.
in? Or
Yeah, just very practically, we started. We talked to Lenovo on this engagement, and they started off by having putting in place governance, different level. They've got a responsible AI committee today with some pretty senior people, and that was the first step. The second step is what they've just done this June, and they've published their responsible AI principles. And they'll keep going. So definitely that's the start of the that's the start of the journey.
Great, Jan. Do you have any feedback on sort of our core KPI focus for the next 12 months? I think there's a lot more detail and recommendations in the progress report, but like, could you distill it in one sentence what you think our next focus should be?
Thank you, Lauren. Distilling it in one sentence is going to be a challenge, but I can try to be concise. So I think there's a consensus among us that principles are, again, not the end goal. This has already come up a few times. So we are setting our sights on, again, impact assessment and evidence of implementation of principles as two of the sort of new pillars of the KIC as we expand work towards this. It remains true that many companies have principles with nothing else to show, right? And ultimately, we see them as the gateway to more concrete and more specific actions that detail how protections and safeguards are put in place. And we think it's a natural evolution for a campaign like this to get more specific without covering absolutely everything and sort of losing its primary focus. But I think if there's one thing that I would want to add here, it's that as we think about the sort of next phase of the campaign and how it relates to other campaigns, we have to prioritize high-risk deployments of AI while also thinking critically about what exactly we mean by high-risk deployments, right? So are we talking facial recognition and use of AI for warfare, generative AI? Those are three at this point, I would say in 2023, classic examples of what is talked about as high risk. But that doesn't include things like the use of AI to target ads, which has plenty of implications for privacy, for example. So again, prioritizing the uses that have the most potential for harm, while also thinking critically and sort of being introspective about what exactly we mean by risk and what are the outer boundaries of that definition.
Yeah, it doesn't just include sort of like governance and oversight. It's actually what are the checks and balances to ensure, for example, bullying is not exacerbated by sort of feeds, right? AI generated feeds, or Autobots and disinformation campaigns, by entities around elections. So there's a lot of, I think, defining what high risk use means. I think it's beyond sort of what's being promoted, for example, in the AI Act. And so I think these are areas that investors and others should focus on. So it sounds like our next conversation needs to be on what are high risk sensitive use cases and really defining what those are. And how they relate to the work we're doing. I do see one question around consumer education and adoption and understanding around AI. But first, I want to bring it back to multi-stakeholder members from Paradigm and Women at the Table. If you could sort of highlight like what's needed really to drive where we need to go in this multi-stakeholder forum, and how maybe we can circumvent the kind of slowness of multi-stakeholder dialogue and focus. One question was related to multi-stakeholder dialogue can't match the pace of innovation. So how do you think this particular KIC can address that challenge of sort of, ongoing rapid pace of technology, and the need, frankly, to have some key interventions in the next 12 months. So what would you do, Caitlin and others, in terms of what should this kick focus on in terms of multi collaboration efforts, like concrete action? Concrete action.
Exactly. I think two of them come from the recommendations that we have. One is to figure out, this is why I was interested about the ethics committee, is just what the kind of structures that are useful, that are impactful within corporations that help, because I think that developers probably want to do things that are absolutely, if they understood that human rights existed in their tech projects, want to do the right thing, but they don't really know how to sort of kick it on up the line. There's a need to move too fast. There's a need to, so what those conversations are structurally that you can help implement within the corporations. And I think that really banging on implementation and impact assessments are critical, because if people were doing impact assessments and they were robust enough, and they dealt with human rights issues and they dealt with bias, because this is very, very much a huge thing, equal, or as well, certainly equal to privacy, is this notion of what's happening in the global south, because we know the generative AI is some of the problems are being solved in English language products, but they're not being solved in lower resource languages. And a low resource language in this use case is Spanish or French or any of the languages of the UN. And then certainly for Swahili or some other like massive languages or Hindi, they're not being solved in the generative AI. So I think that we have to really think about how the health products are being deployed, and having impact assessments would be helpful there.
About I'm sorry, I can't pronounce your name properly.
Yeah.
Timbukile.
Yes, you got it right. Thank you so much. So yeah, I think I'll just take it over from what Caitlin mentioned, and also hammering on human rights impact assessments. I think there's been a lot of, laxity and understanding that perhaps this is an optional issue, but I think it's something that we need to continue to hammer on to say, look, you know what, it's not an optional issue, thing to do human rights impact assessments, but really it's really something pertinent, especially when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, because definitely some key voices will be left behind if there's no due diligence to ensure that voices are represented and technology meets the needs of everyone, because technology is not being built for technology, but it's being built for human beings to draw in the advantages of technology. So in that process, I think it's definitely important that, as a kick as well, I think we'll continue to, hammer in on, the understanding that human rights impact assessments are key, and also that we then take accountability. There's need for due diligence to make sure that every voice is on the table and no one is left behind, and that the processes themselves, even within corporates as well, there are adequate streams that are focusing on all aspects of technology that will ensure that human rights are promoted and protected as well. So I think that will be just my reflection.
Great. Maybe I have a follow-up question. Of all the asks coming out of civil society and grassroots organizations, what are investors not translating properly? Like, where do we need a little bit of translation of civil society asks to investors, and how can we as a kick sort of ensure that gets translated properly into a company ask? The way in which stakeholder engagement is done, the way in which impact assessment is done. What are critiques coming out of your organizations where you think investors really have to have a better understanding? So that's kind of in the learning module. What do you think we could help facilitate in terms of learning between civil society kick members and the investors to enrich our expectations of companies in the dialogues?
Well, I think that there's a little bit of a reluctance also to even use the word human rights in these in these conversations. But I think a human rights-based approach, which actually there is no one human rights-based approach, but these principles, this point of departure that all the member states of the world have agreed on, so we at least depart from the same, we understand we're on the same page about a right to education, a right to health. And these are things, right to a clean and safe environment, that we want to live free from violence, for non-discrimination and equality, that all these things are things that they're the bottom line. And from there we go. But I think that there's a lot of great conversations to have about human in the loop, because that's being used now. We also see governments using it to sort of get out. So they're saying it's a national security thing. It's like, where does human in the loop play? And sometimes having human in the loop isn't the right thing either, right? Because people are deferring facial recognition judgments for all sorts of police departments to the actual technology, even though they are there and they're pushing the button. So I think that there's some really robust conversations to have based on, besides for your wonderful pulpit as investors, but also the idea of reputational risk, because I think that smart corporations are going to look at this as this is the way forward, and this is what's going to give them an edge.
Okay, so human and human rights, and sort of articulating what that actually means in not only in the development of policies, but more importantly in the implementation and remedy. You know, we really haven't talked a lot about access to remedy, and I'm wondering if anyone would like to make any comments about, especially as we move into implementation, mode. What should some forms of remedy look like when looking at the use and monitoring of ethical AI? What would you want companies to implement? This is a place that investors don't feel comfortable talking about. So if Caitlin or Tabakele, if you have thoughts there, or Jan. Jan, do you want to comment on that one?
It's a great question, and I'm struggling to think about how to respond to it in the 2 minutes we have remaining. But I would say that to an extent, this depends on the exact deployment of the technology that we're talking about, right? So in the using, for example, content moderation, right, which is increasingly informed by AI, both in terms of identifying, detecting, and also taking action against content on social media platforms that is deemed to violate a platform's policy. I think more companies should implement specific remedy mechanisms that pertain to algorithmic decisions, right? And of course, there's a very clear link here to transparency, right? Because in the first place, what they should do is to be forthcoming and candid about how prevalent algorithmic enforcement is on the platform, and then if those measures are taken against a specific post, for instance, then people should be aware of it and have the option to sort of lodge a grievance specifically about that. The same goes for more granular decisions like ranking and recommendation algorithms, right? So that is just one illustration, but I think it also speaks to the complexity of the question, because remedy takes on sort of different facets. It's a shapeshifter, I guess, in this sense, depending on the technology or the context of the technology and where it's used.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. And I'm going to just put that out as an action item for us as we move into the next 12 months. I want to give everyone an opportunity to say one thing that they are committed to do in the next 12 months, starting with Patrick, to enrich our engagement and focus. Patrick.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm going to be thinking about in the next 12 months and probably likely beyond is, I guess, the most effective escalation mechanisms that we need to be thinking about. Like, we've got a brilliant seat at the table here, but frankly, I think in the first year of the initiative, I think companies not coming to the table, we can go again next year. But essentially, there comes a point where I guess further investor action is needed. And yeah, I really want to dig down into how we can do that, whether that's through shareholder resolutions or other avenues. But yeah.
Great. Ben, what's one thing you're gonna do?
Yeah, very concretely, one of the things we want to dig into is how AI is affecting jobs, the kind of like just transition due to AI. I've started having conversations on that, and maybe speak to some companies. Maybe this is something that can be taken up by by this forum. But I think this is a prevalent topic for the months to come.
Tim McKinley, one action you'd like to take?
So from our end, I think it's basically to continue to drive and push for AI accountability as well, and I think that's something that is critical in top of the list from our end.
Great. And finally, Caitlin.
I'm going to, and I totally agree with all of my colleagues and with Paradigm for sure. We're going to work across sectors in the KIC, and we're going to work with you as the investor group to try to develop and to sort of share what a human rights-based approach would be that a corporation can digest and understand in their own language so that they can start to work on their accountability frameworks. Yeah.
No, that's great, and really additive to our work. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for participating, and hopefully you got something out of this. There's so much rich detail in the report, and I encourage you to read it. I encourage you to reach out to Nicholas and Jan with any questions, or to any one of us that were part of today's roundtable. And please be active. We expect you to have a seat at the table in the next 12 months. Thanks so much.